No way. Kyle Dubas answered the questions that all of us have been asking since yesterday's chaotic trade deadline, where Dubas made good on his promise that he would return the Pittsburgh Penguins to contender status in a short period of time. The draft picks, the players, everything that Kyle Dubas was able to acquire yesterday at the trade deadline. We're still unpacking all of it, but I'm going to give you guys a summary of everything that happened and talk about what Dubas said following his unbelievably busy trade deadline yesterday. Before we get into the video, first, you guys need to subscribe to the channel. The numbers are going up. You guys are continuing to hit that sub button. We just hit 1,300 subscribers. Keep hitting that sub button and help us out here on this channel as we continue to grow our Pittsburgh Penguins fandom community. And let's jump right into it as Kyle Dubas answered the big questions yesterday following his retention of two key players on the Penguins roster, one that we really thought was going to be traded, one that we weren't sure was going to be traded. Well, Kyle Dubas, he answered the questions about Matt Grzelcyk and Rickard Rakell, which were the two biggest question marks going into yesterday's trade deadline, and this is what Dubas said about Matt Grzelcyk. There was interest, teams kicking the tires. In the end, we got through the deadline, and he remains a member of our team. We expect him to continue to have a strong season, and when we brought him in, I pledged that we would give him the opportunity to get things back rolling. He's taken advantage of that. We'll continue to push him to do so here through the last stretch of the year, and that's good to hear about Matt Grzelcyk because if you look at the numbers, he is having a career year with the Pittsburgh Penguins. Only one goal, but for a defenseman to have 29 assists at this point in the season, to be the quarterback of our power play, to be unbelievably effective in over 20 minutes of ice time per game, Matt Grzelcyk has been everything the Penguins have asked for and more, which means he might be part of the future, and I would not be surprised if he gets a contract extension very soon from Kyle Dubas. That would not be a surprise to any of us because Ryan Shea got an extension yesterday, and we're going to talk about that later in the video. Rickard Rakell was the biggest piece the Penguins had to offer at the deadline, and he was arguably the most valuable player on the market entirely. And Kyle Dubas asked for a king's ransom. He did not get a king's ransom, and he kept Rickard Rakell. You have to do what's right for the Pittsburgh Penguins, and for us, having Rickard Rakell as part of the Pittsburgh Penguins was definitely the right thing to do as we measured it up against everything. We're happy to have him. He's a big part of what we do, and I know he really wants to be here. Rakell is also putting up crazy numbers all season long. 29 goals, leads the team, 53 points in 64 games, on a line with Sidney Crosby, and that's the main reason why Rakell was kept, is to keep Sid happy as he chases Gretzky's record for most point per game seasons. Rickard Rakell can help him achieve that feat. So the questions were answered. We wanted to know, and Dubas told us, just like he's told us all along. He's been very transparent about his plans for this team, and I will say, as I said in the intro, he made very good on his promise to this organization. He executed to perfection, trading away pieces for draft picks, for younger players, guys that he sees being part of this team's future, as we continue to strive to get back to contender status very quickly, and all of these draft picks are going to help us get there. Kyle Dubas acquired a ton of talent. You can clearly see that we got a ton more pieces brought in than we sent out. If you include the draft picks, it's even more impressive because Dubas got a ton of draft picks to rebuild this farm system that has been depleted for a very long time. Dubas goes out there and gets every top 3-round pick he could possibly get to draft these talented young players, plug into that farm system that's already better than it has been in the last 15 years, and we can continue to rebuild this team from the ground up. Take a look at the draft picks that he was able to acquire just in the last week. He acquired a 2028 fifth-round pick from San Jose for Vincent Desharnais. He acquired Luke Schenn and Tommy Novak from Nashville and sent a fourth-round pick to them, getting a second-round pick and a fourth-round pick back after flipping Schenn. And then he got a 2025 second-round pick from Washington for Anthony Beauvillier and a third-round pick plus a couple prospects for Cody Glass. And finally, he got a couple of NHL-ready players, some depth pieces, forward and defenseman for a fifth-round pick. So Dubas is wheeling dealing, improving this roster one move at a time. The busiest trade deadline in recent memory for the Penguins adds up to this. This is how many draft picks we have in the next 3 drafts. It is absurd. By far the most in the entire National Hockey League, especially in the first 3 rounds. Kyle Dubas executed to perfection. And that's what I mean about his promise to return this team to contention. This is exactly how you do it. This is how you accelerate a rebuild. And that is what Kyle Dubas just did. If you compare this to what the Penguins have done in the last 11 drafts from 2024 to 2014, they only had 19 top 100 picks in the last 11 drafts. What he has now for the next 3 is 18 picks in the first 3 rounds. 18 in the first 3 rounds over 3 years, where they only had 19 over the last 11 years. That is a significant turnaround by Kyle Dubas, shipping pieces off, getting maximum value, especially some of those trades that he made for second-round picks, which I'm going to show you now. Kyle Dubas put on a trade deadline masterclass yesterday, and we were updating you in real time of every trade that Dubas made. There were 2 that stood out among all the rest as true fleece jobs by Kyle Dubas. That was Anthony Beauvillier and Luke Schenn. The trade that he made, Luke Schenn to the Jets for a second-round pick and a fourth-round pick. We got our fourth-round pick back, basically, that we traded along with Bunting to get Luke Schenn and to get Tommy Novak, who looked fantastic last night. And then he flipped Anthony Beauvillier, a UFA, at the end of the season that he signed in free agency this past offseason for a second-round pick. That's 2 second-round picks for a rental and a rental, basically, because Luke Schenn was not going to be part of our future. He was a throw-in to that trade where we really thought Tommy Novak was more valuable than Bunting, and Dubas just had to sell it to Barry Trotz, which was very easy to do. If you told that guy that Gullible was written on the ceiling, he would look up. So good job, Kyle Dubas, to take advantage of every single opportunity. And the overall grade for the trade deadline, as I just showed you guys, that Kyle Dubas did, it was a B. That was a B trade deadline, according to a lot of sources. I've seen a lot of Bs, a lot of B pluses, even some A minuses for a overall grade of this trade deadline by Kyle Dubas. And then if you look at the individual trades, the 2 best ones, Luke Schenn, A minus, A minus were the ratings, and then Anthony Beauvillier, A's across the board. I would give it an A plus. Knowing what we know now, we know that Kyle Dubas was playing the long game this entire time. Everything that he said was a trap for other teams. He knew that he could take advantage of every single team in the National Hockey League and just pull off fleece after fleece and just continue adding to this draft capital that we already had. So can we just admire that Kyle Dubas pulled off one of the greatest trade deadlines I have ever seen, and the fact that he was able to bring in more assets than we even thought were possible without trading our best trade piece in Rickard Rakell, and a guy that we thought was almost sure to leave in Matt Grzelcyk, who is now possibly going to get an extension and be part of our future. So let's look at where the Penguins stand. I call this the March of the Penguins, because for once I can say we are marching again. We will be very good. Kyle Dubas is going to make sure of that. He's going to return us to what we were, dominant over a very long stretch of time. A big question mark after the deadline, after all the pieces that Kyle Dubas traded away, who's even going to be on the roster? Who's going to go out on the ice? Who's going to lace up the skates for us? That's the lineup from last night. Dan Kingerski tweeted it out. The Penguins' lines tonight are, goals might be hard to come by, and we did get shut out last night. So, no surprise, losing to the Vegas Golden Knights, being shut out, and that was the lineup that we threw out there. Rakell, Crosby, and Rust, really the only thing we expected, but Kevin Hayes is a second-line winger for us, next to Evgeni Malkin, and, of course, Bemstrom. Emil Bemstrom, welcome back to the NHL as well. Freed up a spot, called him up from AHL Wilkes-Barre. Give him an opportunity. All the guys that were traded, you have to give him an opportunity. And then the third line, Tommy Novak, Philip Tomasino, who I found out last night are very good friends from their time in Nashville, playing on a line together with Dan Heinen, who came over in the Vancouver trade. A lot of new faces this season. And the last line, obviously, Imama has really shown a lot of promise, the 28-year-old winger on that fourth line, kind of an enforcer role, a grinder role, very physical player that was laying the hits on people last night. Loved to see it. Of course, Lizotte and Achari, 2 guys that we thought maybe were going to be traded as well. So this lineup, very interesting. A lot of new faces, some familiar faces, but mostly, hey, that doesn't look like a team that's going to win a whole lot of hockey games. Let's hear a few more things from Kyle Dubas before we wrap up the video today. Thoughts on being 2 years into what he hoped would be a quick rebuild with an old core. Dubas says, and this is all paraphrasing here, a summary from an article, his goal is to build a group around the core. He included Brian Rust and Rickard Rakell by name for what it's worth, up to him as the manager to make the smart decisions to drive the Penguins forward. He didn't want the expectation to be that they would spend all of their assets this summer. If the right moves come, he will go for them, but he wants to temper those expectations about the speed. But he is looking this summer at what is available, possibly adding some pieces with the draft capital that he's added up and the prospects. He pledged to give everything that he can to these older players, one last chance to compete. And if this accelerated rebuild continues at this speed, obviously we're going to see another team in the playoffs with Sidney Crosby, Evgeni Malkin, and Kris Letang still on the roster, which was the ultimate goal from day one. He doesn't know what opportunities will shape up, but if there are opportunities, he will seize those opportunities. What stage are the Penguins at currently? They spent 12 months improving assets, adding cap space. Now, it's time to shift. Dubas doesn't know if he can use all the draft picks given the sheer number, but will have some available for trade and have space in free agency. He will shift from asset collection to starting to add to this roster, though patience will be required. His message to the current players, and you guys saw that lineup, not very impressive, but Dubas emphasized this. He said, certain standard has been set for this team, and we expect that to be upheld. Come in, play hard, train, and there's a number of guys with a lot to play for. There's a massive opportunity for players that have short-term contracts who have been up and down to assert themselves to the coaching staff and management for next season, citing Connor Timmins, Connor Dewar, and Tommy Novak as players under team control for next season. And speaking of that, Ryan Shea got a one-year contract extension last night before the game against Vegas, $900,000 for next year. And Ryan Shea has been playing fantastic for the Penguins lately. He deserved this contract extension, a guy that we weren't sure was going to be traded yesterday because he was going to be a free agent at the end of the year. But much like he's probably going to do with Matt Grzelcyk, Dubas saw enough out of Ryan Shea, gave him the contract extension, well-deserved. And there's a lot of other players, like he just said in that paraphrased article, that are trying out for the team next year, that are playing for these contract extensions. And if they play well enough, they will be rewarded and they will be part of this Penguins future. A very bright future, I might add. Thank you guys for watching this video, this episode of Penguins Digest. It's been a busy couple days with the trade deadline, but I appreciate all of the support and all of you guys watching all the videos on this channel. Subscribe if you haven't already, and we'll be back tomorrow with another episode of Penguins Digest.